Today, we're extremely excited to welcome Eric Garcetti, the mayor of Los Angeles. Before I turn it over to our interviewer, Rex Woodbury and Eric, I just wanted to add one personal anecdote about Eric. Back in the 1990s, after I graduated from college, I went to Oxford to study for 2 years, and Eric was a year ahead of me. He and his future wife were both Rhodes Scholars. Now, this was at a time when Bill Clinton, who was also a Rhodes Scholar, had just been elected president. And so that was very much on people's minds. And right after I arrived at Oxford, I went for a walk around the Oxford campus with another American who was in Eric's class. And he said to me, John, he said, you know, there are a lot of Americans here who think they're going to be president of the United States. He said, you're going to meet a ton of them. And he said, but there's actually one person in my year who is going to be president of the United States, and that's Eric Garcetti. So I don't want to set the expectations too high for Eric's interview, but he's certainly still on that trajectory that was identified way back in those many years ago, and we're really, really proud to have him come speak to us today at the GSB. Thank you, Eric.
Yeah, thank you, Dean Levin, and welcome, Mayor Garcetti. We're very glad to have you here today.
Thank you. It's great to be with you. And Dean Levin, you were doing so well till that last part. You know, why would you wish that upon any friend?
Well, it has been a somewhat eventful few weeks in politics, so we're happy to have you here. Yeah.
It has been. It has been a remarkable. You know, a lot of people wonder what history feels like to be living through it. This is it. I mean, life doesn't radically change when you're living through a historical moment, but it is an exceptionally electric moment, both in shocking ways and both in what is possible. So it's a really good time to be having this talk.
Yes, and as Dean Levin alluded to, you've been a leader on various issues, and you've been mayor for 7 years now, reelected in 2017 with 81% of the vote. You lead the third largest metropolitan economy in the world after New York and Tokyo. And I do want to get into all of that, but I want to back up and kind of understand how you got here. So you've said a lot that you have grown up wanting to change the world. When change the world happens to be part of the Stanford GSB motto here. I'm curious, what are your earliest memories or what was the first part of your upbringing or parenting that led you to really want to have that impact on the world?
Well, you know, I can't remember a time when I didn't want to. I think it's in some people's DNA, most people's DNA, that we don't accept the status quo. And I think we look at the world, it doesn't have to be in a negative way, but we see what is imperfect about it. Mm-hmm. We see what the holes are. We often see, if we look carefully, what we don't see, and we can hear what we don't hear. So who's missing and what voices aren't there? And maybe it's a little bit a combination of being this hybrid human, half Latino, half Jewish, being kind of a border crosser, which I say provocatively. Obviously, my ancestors crossed borders, but being able to navigate between cultures always made me see really, you know, as a Jew, the whole idea of tikkun olam, of healing a broken world. And as a Mexican American, you know, seeing what that, you know, I've passed in plenty of places where people don't know that I'm Latino. So hearing what people say about you when they think you're not there, as well as being able to be inside institutions and organizations, I've always seen what needed to be changed. I think the other thing I'd say is definitely my parents and that family background. My grandfather, who was a dreamer before that term existed, from Mexico, who never finished junior high school, but his life becoming a citizen and enabling me to be where I am today, mayor of that city that took him in. On my mother's side, another grandfather who was a great entrepreneur. He made suits and built up a company that then he became tailored to the president of the United States of America, President Johnson. But he also then took a full page ad opposing the Vietnam War, full knowing he would lose his most important client. But I was raised with the idea that you stand up for what you believe in, no matter what the consequences.
Mm-hmm. And I have to go a little off script here. You mentioning your grandfather and President Johnson. A lot of us here want to be leaders in our community, and many of us, it'll come from the private sector, from being business leaders. It sounds like that was an early iteration of taking a stance on an issue as a business leader, even though it might hurt your business. I'm curious, you know, we've seen this view of changing from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism and different views of what it means to be a business leader in the political realm. What's your view on should businesses take political viewpoints and how can they do that?
I mean, it's tough if you're the head of a publicly traded company versus starting something that's your own. I would say as much as you can do, because politics is not something that just exists with people like me or in city halls, the White House, Congress, and state legislatures. It actually exists everywhere. Politics, the word for city in Greek has the same root as what we now use for politics, polis. So people came to cities in order to engage with each other. And part of that obligation of citizenship was to engage in politics. And it's such a cynical moment when people are like, oh, I hate everybody and all leaders stink and politics is dirty and corrupt and think people are bad. You got to look at yourself and say, no, each one of us, whether you believe in God or whether you're just a raging humanist, a democracy, which we're lucky enough to live in, should reflect its people. And if you believe in people, either in God's image or because of your humanism, it should be a reflection of our very best. So just because politics feels like something you don't do, I think in the business environment, you always are forced to. What's your supply chain? What's the impact of the workers who put together, if you're manufacturing, the material that you sell? Why are you waiting so long to get diversity into your C-suite? In the city of LA, I looked, and government's supposed to move slowly. And in the first 6 months, brought gender equality to over 200 board commissioners who run the police department, the port, the airport. That can be done quite quickly. If we could do that in 6 months, why can't you do it in your company? So I think politics comes in a very personal way, first and foremost. And if you have the foundation for that, it's a springboard to then organize across business and in the private sector around climate, around racial justice, around whatever it is, to have a voice, because the private sector can be extremely powerful when you do.
And you mentioned there some of the issues that are on your plate as mayor. And to back up, in 2013, you're elected mayor at a sort of a difficult moment for Los Angeles. In 2010, there were 1 million more residents in Los Angeles than in 1980, but 165,000 fewer jobs. Los Angeles had one of, if not the highest poverty rate in the country. When you step into that role with so many different problems and 4 million constituents, each with a different view of what you should be prioritizing and working on, how do you as a leader decide what to prioritize?
It's a great question because, it's funny when people say only a few people run the entire country. I've been to the White House enough times that I used to reject that. It's actually true. I mean, a lot of people actually run the country, but the main decisions and the direction of a city, of a country, of a company really do come down to a few people who hopefully listen to a lot and then synthesize that and are able to produce a new direction. For me in Los Angeles, it was natural. I'd already been here for 12 years as a city council member. This was my first executive job really in my life, though, at this level. And it kind of felt like an off-the-rack suit that fit like a custom-made one. I mean, it was something I'd been waiting for in many ways my whole life, and love just being an executive and finding talent and inspiring people. But the way I organized it was threefold. One, what's the core of what you're supposed to do, and focus on that. In politics, so many people think about, oh, I want to do the big, sexy legislation, when people expect government to serve them, certainly at the municipal level. Fix my potholes, take care of my public safety issue, make sure the bus comes on time. I mean, we literally make sure the trains run on time. So I had a back to basics message, which for somebody who considers myself kind of progressive and idealistic and loves the visionary part, I always have had to discipline myself. And I think it's the same with a company. What's the core of what you do? And get that right. If you get that right, you can elevate to the next level. And for me, then, what were the big challenges facing my city? Whether it was jobs, which since 1992, we had gone down in jobs, and building up a new peak in jobs, which we did. Whether it was traffic, whether it was climate change, whether it was housing and homelessness, tackle the big problems. And you might not finish them while you're there, but lay down the foundation for that, which takes you to the third level. Govern and lead as if you're looking at yourself 5, 10, and 25 years from now. Don't worry about the headlines of today. Don't worry about the criticisms of tomorrow. Really think about what I do today. Will it be judged 5 and 10 years from now as the right thing? And if so, don't worry about the noise. Mike Bloomberg, who overlapped with me, actually passed that lesson on to me. He said, the things that I was least popular for are the ones that now people look back and are most glad that I did. And that really stuck with me.
Mm-hmm. To take one of those issues as an example, housing and homelessness, it's such a broad problem. It is systemic, it's still very much an issue, especially given this pandemic and the economic crisis. How do you approach such a long-term systemic issue and break it down? And, it's still ongoing. I'm curious how you have seen some progress, but what's still to be done there?
Yeah, I think the biggest issues, whether it's climate change, which, you can toil away for 5 years and people are saying the earth's still heating up, homelessness, you can do amazing things and people say it's still there and encampments are growing, or things like gender and racial equality, which you can continue pushing forward and then see, that we still have racism and sexism and homophobia and all these things. To me, I'll answer that 2 ways. One is you first have to deal with what's in front of you. And I looked kind of back in history. I think it's really important. When the pandemic was coming, I did the same thing. Educate yourself about those who have come before, because nothing is new. This might be a new iteration, it might be a new incarnation, but it's an old challenge and there's old history to learn from. And so, here in Los Angeles, we had talked about policies for things like inclusionary zoning to mandate affordable housing when market rate housing is built. Tom Bradley, our greatest mayor, tried that 40 years ago and not gotten it through. We passed that. We looked at, for a long time, people said we needed a dedicated source of funding for homelessness. We've passed not just one measure to build 10,000 units of housing, but 2, a countywide services sales tax to allow the services to go with that housing, et cetera. We did all of those things that people really had talked about for decades, and those are so important. Again, we might not see the results of them in 2 or 3 years, but you'll see them in a decade long of steady work. But second, I approach it systemically and systematically, which is to look at something like homelessness. At the local level, it's funny, I run a city and people say, Mayor, that's your city. There's people on the streets, fix it. Then I explain to them, let's boil down homelessness. It's trauma meets high rent. The city of Los Angeles doesn't control our child welfare system, our veteran system, our jails and our prisons. It doesn't control what happens with sexual and domestic violence. It doesn't control, much of the economy. We can do zoning, but we don't do the capital outlays for big housing. So most of the causes in and the cures out of homelessness have nothing to do with anything I have direct power. I have sanitation workers and police officers, but cleaning and arresting your way out of homelessness is not a solution. So I've come to the point where I'm really speaking bluntly with people saying, if you want homelessness to end, it's not going to come from me or the next mayor or the next mayor. It has to come from a national right to housing. And every country that I looked at in the world that's eliminated homelessness has a right to housing. And think about this with hunger and with healthcare in America. We decided at some point, people shouldn't go hungry. If you qualify for food stamps, 100% of people qualify, get them so they don't starve. If you qualify for healthcare and you're poor, you get Medicaid. We call it Medi-Cal in California. Same thing with poverty for seniors and Social Security. But here in America, the biggest housing initiative we have, called Section 8, which is a voucher you can take out there. Nationally, 1 in 4 people that qualify get it. In Los Angeles, it's 1 out of 8. And so that means people wait decades. And 7 out of 8, many of them live on our streets. So I worked with both Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden and became national co-chair of Joe's campaign. And when he asked me to do that, he said, what do you want? I said, I don't want anything personally, but I want you to put in a platform that we would expand to an entitlement Section 8 housing. And I do believe that we can solve people's mental health. We can solve people's job training needs. We can solve what brings them to the street, their addictions and other things in some cases, if we get them in housing first. But there's no city that will ever have enough money to do that without national help.
And something you alluded to there is not only are you working with your city council and people on the ground in Los Angeles, but you're increasingly working with other mayors, with governors, with the federal government. And, you led a coalition of mayors against homelessness. You've been at the forefront of the climate movement led by mayors after the US pulled out of the Paris Agreement. How have you seen the role of mayor? What does mayor mean in 2020? And how has mayorship changed since 2010 or 2000, just over the last couple of decades?
Bill Clinton once said the 2 best jobs in politics are president of the United States and mayor of a big city in America. It's funny, I shared that story once in the Oval Office with then President Barack Obama, who was asking if I wanted to be his urban czar and kind of oversee all the urban policies. It was the week that the Obamacare website had gone down just after it went live. And he said, you can scratch the first one from that list. So, I think the power that you have as a mayor is amazing. I mean, I run the largest port in the Americas, the fourth busiest airport in the world and second biggest in the country, the largest municipal utility. And that's before you start with the normal stuff, the police, fire, you know, talk about police and reform and racial justice. Like, I get to do that in real time, let alone fixing people's problems and things like that. But the network between mayors has never been more important and has never been stronger. It really has been part of my story, and I think the story of cities and the globe right now. For instance, I chair the title that I'm proudest to have besides mayor. Well, proudest is husband and father, but the professional title is chair of C40 cities. This is a group of cities, the largest cities in the world. There's 97 of us now, so the number is a little off, but 97 cities that comprise a quarter of the world's GDP. So collectively more than any nation. And we're combating climate change together. But during this COVID-19 crisis, we hit the bat signal and put together the most moving Zoom call I've been a part of. 55 mayors of the greatest cities of the world were on the call together in the beginning of this pandemic. So we had the mayor of Milan, when Northern Italy was the place that, you know, people were in the hallways of hospitals. The mayor of Seoul, when they were the model for testing. The mayor of New Delhi, who had just shut down Delhi, and 2 days later, 1 billion people got a stay-at-home order when his national government followed. And so whether it's gender equity, migration, climate change, whether it's global or domestically, I chair also Climate Mayors, which is now 450 mayors. When President Trump said we're getting out of the Paris Climate Accords, we didn't cry in a corner, we just picked up the phone. And Republican, Democratic, independent mayors from 48 states said, if he's out, we're in. So I always tell people, don't cede the power you have before you try to exercise it. When everybody was so upset, those who didn't like President Trump, that of the trauma he was giving a lot of people and the power he was trying to exercise over us, said even if it was Hillary Clinton as president, that power would have been in our hands, that responsibility would have been in our hands, and we haven't lost that with President Trump. So that network is really changing the world, moving it, and cities, I think, are going to accelerate their importance for the next half century.
About a little over half the world now lives in cities. I think it's going to 70% over the next 20 or 30 years. And you've called cities the laboratory for democracy and innovation. What is the future of cities? You know, what's Los Angeles or a big city going to look like in 2030 or 2040?
Well, it's really up to all of us to explore and to mold both from the public, private, and civic sectors. But the vision I have here, you know, I'm very excited. We have this date now less than 10 years from now when the Olympic Games and the Paralympic Games will come to Los Angeles. My first act as mayor was to write a letter to the Olympic Committee saying we wanted to pursue the Games. We lost the US nomination to Boston, then they dropped out. It was a long, circuitous road of resilience, but LA loves the Olympics. And as a kid, I saw them come to my city in 1984. And it was the best experience of my life. And it's a point on the horizon where we can kind of align a vision of what we want a city to be. To me, I think cities are going to be the systems, because cities are a system of systems, are going to pretty radically shift. The two-dimensional disruption we've seen in commerce and communications, think one-click ordering and FaceTiming, is now going to come into 3 dimensions. We're going to see transportation modes change, whether that's underground and things like Hyperloop or the Boring Company, or whether it's airborne taxis that move through our spaces. We're working with companies like Google to literally map out the 3-dimensional space of cities so that we can understand and make sure people are safe in that space, but use that for everything from moving commerce to people. I think there'll be more equitable and more livable cities. I think people really want to have the concentration of jobs, of housing, and of recreational activities all in the same neighborhood, rather than the old city, especially in California and Los Angeles embodies this, where you put one thing over there and 20 minutes by car over there and 20 minutes by car over there, because now you can't get 3 blocks in 20 minutes. I also think that it'll be a place still of radical innovation, a place of deep investment. And why I would not ever walk away from cities or LA specifically is what I've tried to put in place is a 4 to 5 decade long strategy of infrastructure. So we're going to be building 15 rapid transit lines, the largest infrastructure initiative in US history ×2 I passed a few years ago called Measure M. Everybody thinks of us as the car place. And what we wrote into that is it could be light rail, it could be busways, but we also left that open for the technologies that will emerge. What we guaranteed was the funding in place. We're going to recycle 100% of our water. We're going to have 0 carbon buildings, 0 carbon electricity, 0 carbon transportation. So it'll be much more sustainable. And then finally, and this is my hope, we'll see cities that really are a place for much more of a middle class and more justice and equity for folks. Because right now, cities are either left behind cities or hyper successful cities that are barbell cities, both on equity and on opportunity. And we have to fix that. We have to fix that, I believe, through education mostly, but we also have to fix it by the way we structure our economy. And we're trying to put that in the DNA of LA and who gets to work here. And just, again, to my first point, who's missing, what voices don't we hear, what faces don't we see, and making sure that's a part of our strategy.
Mm-hmm. And to your point there, I think we've seen during the last couple of weeks in these elections, you know, not just a divide between rural and urban, but Los Angeles is very much a microcosm for where America is going. I think in the 90s, LA became a majority minority city, meaning there are more people of color than white folks, and that's where the country will be in the next 20 years or so. How do you, in this deeply partisan moment that we're in, that is largely around very different views of these demographic shifts that our country is undergoing, how do you lead for people at both ends? You know, you have constituents at either extreme with different views. During this partisanship, how are you a leader?
You know, there's two ways. My advice to people is stop being so fearful of engaging with each other. Because in a vacuum of real engagement, it's, you know, Twitter flame wars and comments on Facebook pages and hyper ideologies. And I don't mind, by the way, extreme ideas on any part of the spectrum, as long as they don't take away my rights and they're not intolerant. I think you need new ideas. But when that becomes ideology and that becomes something in which the form, like I think the left, which I'm a part of, sometimes unfortunately copies the methodology of what we've just seen from Donald Trump, because we think we have to fight back in the same way. And there's a cost that we pay. Second point is my greatest fear right now is that there's a great dehumanization going on. And part of that is because so much of our interactions are virtual this year, but increasingly from technology, so much of it is virtual. So the cues that human beings are created for, to see in 3 dimensions and to feel and to smell and to see and to just kind of intuit, are lost when we reduce people to not just 2 dimensions visually, but 2-dimensional personally. So, you know, for instance, let's take the hardest issue right now in America in many ways, policing and racial justice. So there's no question we have dehumanized people of color in this country since the beginning of our history. People have that lives consciously and unconsciously in our hearts, our actions, and our perceptions. So how do we recognize that within the culture of our police departments and public safety departments? But then when you read that 40% of people support the police of Generation Z and 60% don't, and it's kind of cool to march on the streets and say all cops are bastards, those are 20-something-year-old human beings that do have guns and a badge, who have devoted their lives to trying to protect lives by and large. They've been motivated by something good. And how do we bring those conversations together instead of pulling it apart? Because now we have police officers who feel totally under siege, and we need them to be the agents of change and to build on the successes of changing culture and even ceding some of their power to others to provide those services. And how do we continue to not lose this moment so that people of color don't see this as yet again one more year when people took to the streets, asked for some stuff, and there was just a little bit of reform. So to me, that's just one case, but we dehumanize each other right now. I'm dehumanized all the time. Sometimes it's in positive ways. Oh my God, Mayor, you're so amazing and you've done such great things and you're so perfect. And as I loved always, Barack Obama said, ask my wife about me and the dishes. Like, we're human beings, but we also get dehumanized in a negative way. People who decide who you are, who attack you. And leadership has never been more challenging than right now. I think for CEOs, for mayors, when I talk to my fellow mayors, I have a little support group of 15 or 20 on a tech stream. And we have people visiting our houses and spray painting our walls. We've got people who are camping out and chaining themselves to our lobbies. I mean, those things didn't happen specifically to me, but other mayors. And it is, and similarly in the private sector, you have a real woke moment that's also meeting Lord of the Flies. And leaders are trying to figure out, how do I navigate what is about racial justice and what's just about good management and personality? And so I guess I come back to that leading right now takes a rehumanization and reminding people of those moments of human connection. And even if we're a different perspective, even if I've done something wrong and you want to teach me what's better, we have to do that by leading with love, not with the anger that we have.
Mm-hmm. And Mayor Garcetti, I want to leave a few minutes for audience Q&A, but we're asking one final question to all speakers who come this year. And it's relevant to what you just said. The question is, during your toughest moments, many of which likely have come this year as a leader, what are the principles that you turn to?
The principles that I turn to as a leader, I've got in practice, I would say, always innovate,
Mm-hmm.
always accelerate,
Mm-hmm.
always collaborate, and always communicate. Think about COVID. I didn't wait for other cities to figure it out or even bother whether it was my jurisdiction to set up testing centers, be the first city to close things down, the first to mandate masks, the first to erase the racial gap with African-American deaths, the first to test people without symptoms. I just did it. So it was innovate and accelerate. But I couldn't have done that if I hadn't spent 7 years collaborating. People love to hate the big city mayor in a region because you might only be 40% of the population, but you get 99% of the headlines. I've met with 87 other mayors in my region quarterly that I convene for 7 years. So they trust me, they know me, I listen to them, I elevate their voices. So collaboration is really important. And then for 74 times I've been before my public communicating hard truths in the middle of a crisis. I got sick of my own voice, but I kept doing it. Now it's thankfully once or twice a week, though we'll probably ramp up given the rise right now, but it was daily for the first few months. And I think communication is everything. Own your story, tell your story, and think like an author. You're a narrator once you get to be at the highest levels of leadership. You're a narrator of a story you need to motivate people around. And then the personal things that I would say is be humble, but be fearless. Learn to listen. It's more important than learning how to speak, really learning how to listen. And then I'll come back to what I said in the previous question, lead with love. That really is, my motto. My team makes fun of me until they start to adopt it and they see that it really is. All those things as a good leader mean nothing if you're not leading from a moral place of love.
Mm-hmm. Mayor Garcetti, we have a few questions from students. The first question is from Neha Dalal.
Ed?
Thank you so much, Rex and Mayor Garcetti. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Neha. I'm an MBA 2 coming from a background in public policy. We have a new president-elect, thanks in part to your work. I'm not going to ask you whether you're going to join the administration, but what I will ask you is beyond what you already mentioned around housing, how can a Biden administration best support cities like LA?
Well, I remember what it was like when Joe Biden was in the White House, because it was just 2013. I was a new mayor. I was invited with about a dozen mayors from around the country who'd just been elected from Detroit and LA and Chattanooga and New York and other places. And I was expecting to go there for a photo op. And we instead, in the Roosevelt Room, had a 2-hour private conversation where they just listened to every city and every city's incoming mayor talk about America. I think first and foremost, rather than programs or people, it is that perspective that I'm just looking forward to, because once you develop that relationship and that listening, you don't know when you'll need them. You don't know what you'll need them for. You don't know the great idea that you want to take up to the national level for them, but establishing that relationship. And Joe Biden really is who you see. He has that heart. He's a great talker and a great listener, and knows what he's talking about. So I think that's the way to first start helping cities. Specifically, though, I would set up something like a local government council in the White House that would bring together city, county, and some state leaders to be a regular group to bounce things off of and to ask for them to distribute kind of initiatives. And then I would have an urban agenda that starts really with opportunity in our cities. What businesses closed down, what people did not get PPP loans, what workers disproportionately lost their jobs in the Latino community, for instance, and a lot of people in hospitality and frontline jobs really have been decimated, and help mayors and cities be the eyes and ears of an American recovery. That's what I would wish. Thanks, Neha.
Next, we have a question from Brad Austin.
Hey, Brad.
Mayor Garcetti. My name's Brad Austin, and I'm a first-year MBA student here at Stanford, and also a proud Angelino of the past 10 years. My question to you is, how do you manage your longer-term vision for the city while responding to shorter-term demand of residents? And do you view these two as mutually exclusive or not?
No, they're definitely not. I mean, certain things, an earthquake that happens is an earthquake that happens, you have to respond to in real time, but think about how you rebuild from an earthquake. You better be doing that for the long haul, strengthening buildings even more, looking at ways to build greener. There's always an intersection of the two. You never have to cleave off between. But there is a good point. There is the urgency, especially as a mayor. I have 50 urgent things a day. And it took me about a year as mayor to recognize that if I was just a passive leader waiting for my staff to brief me about everything, I could spend all day long being briefed. I have 38 enterprises that I oversee. They're called city departments, but you know, the Port of LA is a business enterprise. Like I said, the busiest port in the Americas, trying to take something like Department of Water and Power and make that 100%, you know, renewable, zero carbon electricity grid. That has short-term consequences on reliability if you don't do it the right way. So you have to be nimble enough. I kind of carved up my time in 4 sections. It was, yes, some briefing time, but only a quarter rather than 90%. A quarter of the time needed to be kind of proactive management of my people, checking in with them, giving them personal tips and policy tips. A quarter was my visioning time of like stepping back, talking to others, reading, doing thinking. And then a quarter of the time is in relational time. Keep up those relationships that are absolutely critical, because if you haven't talked to somebody in a few years and then you call, say, I need help, you haven't developed kind of an intimacy that you're going to need in moments of deep, deep need. So there is the back and forth of the urgent and the long term. But I think if you're good in leadership, you always tie those two things together. Think about the urgency of this year. We built in C40 a COVID-19 recovery playbook with these mayors from around the world, a committee that I constituted, and the mayor of Milan was the chair of it, but we had an incredible mayor from each continent write this script. And it's all about the long-term recovery. Don't just build back what we had. Don't return to normal. That isn't good enough. We should be rejecting fossil fuels as we build our energy grids back. We should have no stimulus that's not a green stimulus. We should be investing in public transit above and beyond what was there before if we want people to actually surge into the economy. So what seems urgent in the now is really about the long-term visioning as well. And I think good leaders can combine those two.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our last student question is from Jessica Barzilay.
Hey, Jessica.
Hi, Mayor Garcetti. Thank you so much for coming to speak to us. As a fellow alum of Harvard Westlake, I wanted to ask you what lessons you've carried with you from high school, and especially as the classroom experience has gotten totally warped in COVID, what do you think a high school education should do and should be?
I think a high school education, first and foremost, is about your emotional development. I know we fixate so much on academic, and there's a lot of important academic development, but I've learned, you know, be nice, figure out people who are nice to you, be around people that celebrate you rather than kind of denigrate you. Know who, you know, don't chase the shiny things that seem shiny at the time, but really, you know, my best friends, my 3 best friends are still my best friends from 7th grade. We did plays together. We were all, you know, aspiring actors. 2 are still actors today, and we hang out to this very day. And I think, you know, those life lessons are so much more important than I mean, I had extraordinary education. I remember many pieces of that education. I think the other thing is, to return to what I said before, is be fearless and try everything. Don't think, you know, we all have imposter syndrome. Women experience that, especially people of color, especially. But, you know, you can pick, you know, the 3rd generation Vanderbilt, like heir, whatever he's doing, you know, everybody kind of wonders, how the hell am I here? And that's okay. Human beings are naturally inquisitive and brave, and we're naturally kind of down on ourselves and wondering like whether we can do it or whether we're frauds and we'll be failures. The other thing I learned was when you try everything, it's okay to fail. You know, in politics, that's a tough lesson, because if you're an entrepreneur, you can fail 4 times, and if your 5th time's a hit, you are like a legend. In politics, you do 4 things great, but you mess up once, it's done. So it's the inverse kind of leadership reward. But if we can bring more entrepreneurialism and creativity to our lives, and I think that's something that I learned certainly in my education, the world will be okay. We are a stubborn people, human beings. We are a creative people, human beings. There's nothing, including climate change, racial justice, this pandemic, that we can't rise to. The day that I stop believing in that is the day I quit being a leader. Thanks.
Here at Stanford, Mayor Garcetti, we like to end with a quick lightning round. So 1-word answers or 1-sentence answers. Are you ready?
Got it.
Favorite thing about LA?
Freedom.
Most misunderstood thing about LA?
Walking.
Most misunderstood thing about being mayor?
Being all powerful.
TikTok or Instagram?
Heart, TikTok, daily practice, Instagram.
You have to go away on an extended vacation and name one Hollywood celebrity as interim mayor. Who do you turn to?
Jimmy Kimmel. You do a great job.
I agree completely. We know there's a lot of traffic despite the walking comment in LA. What's Mayor Garcetti listening to in his car?
A little bit of everything. Often Keith Jarrett, my favorite. I'm a pianist. I have a piano in my office, and he's the greatest. And I was very sad to learn he just recently had a stroke and will never probably play again.
Mm-hmm. You have to be mayor of one city outside of the US. Which do you choose?
Barcelona. It's where I got engaged, and I love that city.
Awesome, Mayor Garcetti. I know you have a city to run. Thank you for joining us. Hopefully we can host you here in person soon.
I would love that. And thank you so much, Rex. And thank you to Dean Levin, to all the questions. They were superb. I really enjoyed the conversation. And I sign off every night when I address people this way, but sending everybody strength and love. Look after your mental, your spiritual well-being in a really tough year. And we're going to get through this.
Yeah.